My name is Kay. Welcome to ArtBookNook, where I share my wonderful collection of art and craft books with you. Watercolour is often one of the first mediums people are drawn to when they begin their journey into art, but it can be surprisingly tricky if you don't understand how the medium behaves. Today I'm looking at The Complete Guide to Watercolour, written by David Webb. This book is what I describe as a compendium-style book, designed to help beginners and improvers understand the basics and, more importantly, how watercolour actually works. David Webb is an artist who has specialised in watercolour for over 40 years, and in his book he shares that experience through clear and practical guidance, and it's for everyone from complete beginners to more experienced painters looking to refine their skills or learn something new. The book contains 256 pages and it's divided into 5 main chapters, beginning with tools and materials before moving on to core techniques. And from there it looks at making pictures, including focal points and perspective, followed by a chapter on expressing form and surface, covering landscapes, texture, figures and portraits. And the final chapter explores different approaches to watercolour through looking at the work of other artists. And here we get to meet David, where he shares how he became an artist, the artist who inspired him to take up watercolour, and why he loves working with the medium. On the right hand side you'll see some examples of David's lovely paintings. So let's begin with chapter 1, Tools and Materials. There's an enormous range of watercolour paints available, and it can feel a bit daunting, especially when you're starting out, and of course your choice might be influenced by your budget. David breaks down the key things to consider, such as the difference between student and artist quality paints, pans or tubes, as well as inks, gouache and watercolour pencils. There's also a useful bonus tip on how to remove stubborn stuck caps from the paint tubes. I wish I had £1 for every time I've struggled with that one. In pigment properties, David explains that watercolour paints are made from different pigments, each with their own way of behaving. Some colours are transparent, others more opaque, some are easy to lift out, while others will stain the watercolour paper. In the image at the bottom left, he shows how these properties behave in practice and also explains granulation, which is why some pigments will settle into the texture of the paper. This is a natural quality of certain pigments rather than a fault, and one that many artists really enjoy and choose to work with, myself included. David also encourages you to check the information provided by manufacturers, as the colour name can behave quite differently from one brand to another. When it comes to brushes, David helps to take the mystery out of what can be a confusing choice for beginners especially. He explains that despite the huge range available, you only really need a small number of brushes to get started, and that shape and size matter far more than quantity. He introduces the most common brush shapes, such as round, flat, mop and rigger, explaining what they're used for, and also points out that brush sizes can vary between manufacturers. Because of this, it's often better to choose a brush based on how it feels in your hand rather than the number that's printed on it. There's also practical advice on what to look for when buying brushes and how to care for them, along with a brief look at brush pens and some less common shapes. Now David looks at brush fibres and how they affect the way a brush behaves. He explains the differences between natural hair and synthetic brushes, including how much water they hold, how springy they feel, and how this can influence the marks you make. Importantly, he points out that good results aren't limited to expensive brushes, and that synthetics can be an excellent and affordable choice, especially when you're starting out. He also includes practical advice on caring for your brushes, from cleaning and reshaping them to storing them correctly, helping them to last longer and perform well over time. On the right hand page, David demonstrates how simply changing the way you hold a brush can create very different marks, even with the same brush. And he shows this using round, flat, mop and rigger brushes, and encourages you to experiment. When it comes to palettes, there are a range of different types, including plastic, metal and ceramic. And David explains their practical differences, such as mixing space, ease of cleaning, and how colour might behave on different surfaces. If you're anything like me, you'll probably end up trying lots of different palettes and use different ones depending on what you're working on. For example, I've got a very large ceramic palette which is extremely heavy, but I've also got a collection of plastic ones which are portable. And there are some artists who only ever mix their colours directly on the paper and have several small bowls arranged around their workspace, each bowl holding a single colour. When it comes to choosing watercolour paper, the options can feel quite overwhelming, and the paper you choose will make a real difference to how the paint behaves. David illustrates this clearly here, explaining how different papers suit different subjects. For example, if you enjoy painting flowers, you might prefer a hot pressed paper with a smooth surface, allowing the paint to flow in soft, even washes. Cold pressed or rough papers, on the other hand, offer more texture, which can work beautifully for landscapes, especially when used with granulating pigments. David also explains paper weight and why heavier papers are less likely to buckle, and offers practical advice on blocks, pads and loose sheets, along with helpful tips on storing and caring for your paper. It's taken me quite a number of years to find the paper that I like. I love to paint landscapes, so I prefer cold pressed paper, and I don't like papers that have got like a regular pattern in them. I like them to be more random, but it's all a case of trial and error and personal preference. And here David explains why stretching watercolour paper can be helpful, especially with lighter weight papers that are more likely to buckle when used with lots of water. He shows when stretching is worth doing and when it's not really necessary, and then demonstrates a clear step-by-step method for stretching your paper using simple materials, along with a few practical troubleshooting tips to help avoid problems later on. And David suggests some additional equipment that can be useful, including everyday studio essentials such as pencils, erasers, masking fluid and tape, water jars, sponges and scrap paper. The emphasis is very much on practicality rather than necessity, so you don't need all these things. And to end this chapter, David looks at getting comfortable, both in the studio and when working away from home. He focuses on creating a simple, practical workspace, covering things like lighting, posture and positioning your materials so you can work comfortably for longer. On the right-hand page, he turns to the Watercolour Artist Travel Kit, showing you how little you really need to paint out on location, keeping things lightweight and portable with some well-chosen selection of paints, brushes, paper and water. So we've now arrived at Chapter 2, Techniques, which is very comprehensive, so you may want to grab a drink before we begin. This section spans around 70 pages and is packed with examples, demonstrations and practical projects that you can try for yourself. David also includes examples of these techniques used by other artists, which helps to put everything into context and shows how they can be applied in different ways. We begin with the colour wheel, which David describes as the artist's friend. Colour theory can sometimes put beginners off, as it's often seen as something technical that sucks the fun out of painting, but David explains that a basic understanding of the colour wheel is actually very easy to learn. On the right-hand page, he shows a colour wheel created using the primary colours from his own palette and includes clear guidance on how you can paint your own colour wheel using the colours you already have. He also explains concepts such as colour temperature, along with complementary, analogous and harmonious colour schemes. And running along the bottom of both pages are examples of paintings that show the colour wheel in action. Starting with a limited palette is one of the best ways to understand how colour behaves and how colours mix. By getting to know a small selection of colours, you will mix more confidently and achieve more harmonious results. On the right-hand page, David shares his own palette, explaining why he's chosen each colour. The chart on the left shows each colour in David's palette mixed with every other colour, giving a clear visual sense of the wide range of colour mixes you can achieve from just a few colours. He also discusses mixing greens, explaining why many artists prefer to mix their own rather than rely on ready mixed ones. Tonal values are the areas of light, dark and everything in between, which David describes as one of the most important elements in creating a convincing painting. He explains that getting the tonal structure right often matters more than colour when it comes to giving a sense of form and depth. Using simple examples such as spheres and cubes, David shows how light falls across an object where shadows sit and how tonal contrast helps make forms feel solid and three-dimensional. He also includes practical advice for troubleshooting paintings that feel flat or lack impact, showing how reducing a scene to its tonal values can help you see where stronger contrasts are needed before colour is even considered. There's a saying, isn't there, that tone or value does all the work and colour takes the credit. When it comes to watercolour, water is just as important as the paint. The ratio of water to pigment determines the strength of your colour mixes, while how wet the paper is when you apply the paint controls how much that colour spreads. David has provided some excellent examples across these 2 pages here. There are 3 main ways of mixing colour: mixing on the palette, mixing directly on the paper and glazing, all explained step by step with clear photographs that make the differences very easy to see. Glazing is one of my favourite techniques. It does require a bit of patience while you wait for each layer to dry, but the shimmering effect is quite magical. I've actually made a little glazing tutorial which I'll link to below in the description if you'd like to explore this technique in more depth. The example paintings across these pages show how different artists have used colour and their application to convey a wide range of subjects and weather conditions, from bright warm sunlight to more muted overcast days. And here are several examples of contrasting values or tone, from the lightest lights to the darkest darks. The strong contrasts help to create paintings that feel dramatic and full of mood. David introduces washes, which is one of the most fundamental techniques in watercolour and an important one to practice early on. We begin with a flat wash, with step-by-step photographs showing you how to apply an even layer of colour from top to bottom, keeping the wash consistent and avoiding streaks or tide marks. There's clear advice on brush size, paper angle and keeping enough paint in the brush, along with troubleshooting tips for stripy or uneven washes. It's a simple technique in theory, but one that really rewards patience and practice. We then move on to the graduated or gradated wash, which builds on the flat wash by gradually changing the strength of the colour. Again, David's clear step-by-step images show you how to transition smoothly from a darker tone to a lighter one by adjusting the amount of water as you work down the page. This technique is really useful for skies, water and any subject where you want a gentle shift in tone, and there are helpful tips for avoiding uneven gradations and hard edges. Next we come to the variegated wash, where more than one colour is used within the same wash. This technique allows colours to blend softly into one another on the paper, creating subtle shifts and added interest. The step-by-step images show how to introduce a second colour while the paper is still wet, letting the colours merge naturally. It's particularly effective for skies and backgrounds. I have to say the photographs in David's book illustrating these steps are excellent. And if you like the effect of a variegated wash, one artist that springs to my mind is Shirley Trevenor, a wonderful artist. A tinted background wash provides you with a pre-coloured surface that will influence any transparent washes laid on top. It's an excellent way to convey atmosphere and mood in a painting, and David has provided a step-by-step project here so you can follow along and try this effect for yourself. We now move into wet on wet, where colour is applied to damp paper and allowed to spread naturally. This creates soft flowing effects that are ideal for skies, water and atmospheric scenes. I've used this to create the effect of rain coming, down out of clouds. But timing is key here. The wetness of the paper and the amount of pigment you add will shape how the paint behaves. It just takes a little practice. Applying wet paint onto dry paper produces clean, sharp edges, which is useful for describing objects and adding texture. David does caution, though, against using this technique everywhere, as too many hard edges can leave the viewer's eye with nowhere to rest, and the painting can start to lose atmosphere. So a balance of hard and soft edges creates a far more natural and convincing result. The paintings in this gallery display a variety of wash techniques, including wet on wet and wet on dry, and also multiple layers. Some show a loose treatment, while others demonstrate a tighter, more illustrative style. It's amazing, isn't it, the different styles of painting and effects you can get with watercolour. Now David introduces dry brush, a technique that uses very little water to create broken textured marks. It's particularly effective for suggesting rough surfaces such as rocks or surf or foliage, where you want sparkle and detail without overworking the page. This technique works the best if you're using cold press or rough watercolour paper. Resists are used when an area needs to be left unpainted, acting as a barrier between the paint and the paper. In watercolour, the two most commonly used resists are masking fluid and wax. David advises keeping a brush just for masking fluid so you don't accidentally ruin one of your best brushes. And a simple wax candle is very effective for preserving the white of the paper, especially for sparkles on water. Sometimes it's easier to preserve areas of white by painting around the subject rather than masking it. This technique is known as negative painting, and the approach can keep the work feeling fresh. And here is a little step-by-step project for you to try this out for yourself. As well as preserving areas of white, masking can also be used over coloured washes. By building up a series of masked layers, you can gradually add detail without losing the freshness of the underlying paint, as shown on the right-hand page. An absolute master of this technique is an artist called Chen Chung Wei, and he describes this technique as painting fairy lights. For a special birthday, I actually treated myself to Chen's tutorial, which you can purchase on PaintTube TV. It's called Painting Nature in Watercolour, and it's absolutely magical. I highly recommend it. Lifting out is used to reclaim light areas by removing paint from the paper, rather than masking them in advance. It's very effective for highlights on glass, water and reflective surfaces, and works best while the paint is still damp, as the step-by-step examples here show. It's actually a technique that I often forget about, and it's one that I ought to remember really. In all of the paintings shown here, the whiteness of the paper plays an important role in establishing tones through transparent washes and by creating bright highlights, misty effects, backlit features and important compositional shapes. I do apologise for my voice. I notice it's a bit husky, but I am recovering from a bad cold. Splattering is a lively way to break up flat areas and add texture and energy, and used with restraint it can suggest foliage, blossom or surface detail. Personally, I really enjoy splattering. Adding salt crystals to a wet wash produces a very distinctive texture that can be used on subjects such as old stone walls, ancient buildings or lichen encrusted rocks, and even areas of foliage. As the salt absorbs the moisture, it pulls pigment away and leaves behind these natural crystalline patterns. And it's worth experimenting with different salts because they all create different patterns. Sometimes called blooms or cauliflowers, backruns happen when the wet paint flows back into an area that's beginning to dry. They're often accidental, but they can be used intentionally and add beautiful organic textures particularly in foliage and loose background washes. Earlier in this video I mentioned the artist Shirley Trevenor, and Shirley actually embraces these backgrounds and uses them intentionally in her work. This is one of Shirley's wonderful paintings that I'm very proud to own. It's called Still Life Against a Pinboard. And here is a selection of paintings showing a variety of techniques that have been employed by these various artists to represent texture. So we've got splatter, salt, masking fluid and gouache, which we're going to look at shortly. All of these can be used to create subtle and striking textural effects. I love the way David has included work from other artists to really showcase the amazing range of techniques that can be achieved with watercolour. Line and wash allows you to combine the precision of pen and ink with the fluidity of watercolour washes. There are two main ways to approach it. The first is to draw the line work first and apply the wash over the top, which will give you a more controlled result. The second method is to begin with the wash and add the line work afterwards, and this produces a looser, more spontaneous feel. In this gallery of line and wash paintings, just like handwriting, you can clearly see how each artist has developed their own unique and personal style. Gouache can be very useful for placing light pigment over dark and can either be white or coloured. It can be painted on directly or mixed to a creamy consistency and splattered over a painting. Gouache is similar to watercolour, but it contains much more pigment and is always opaque, which makes it particularly handy for adding mist highlights. When gouache is thinned with water, it becomes semi-opaque, making it useful for subtle textures and highlights, but because it changes as it dries, David encourages you to undertake a bit of practice to understand how it behaves. And here are three lovely examples of paintings where gouache has been used in conjunction with watercolour. On the left we have a fabulous painting by Paul Talbot Greaves with his instantly recognisable bold style. Gouache has been used to add texture to the stone wall in the foreground and the fine lines of the wire fence. I've put a link in the description below to my review of Paul's wonderful book Painting Landscapes in Watercolour. You might want to have a look at that one. On the donut jar, the master, James Gurney, has used a watery gouache to achieve the illusion of a shiny transparent glass jar, and Bernhard Vogel has managed to convey the atmosphere of a rainy day with the addition of swift brushstrokes to represent streaks of rain. And David finishes this very comprehensive technique section by comparing two approaches to watercolour: the multiple wash method, which builds gradually from light to dark, and the more direct method, where each area is taken straight to its finished tone. Chapter 3 is all about making pictures. Here the emphasis is on learning how to see, how to select a focal point and create visual pathways that will guide the viewer's eye around a painting. David also explores perspective, along with ways of creating atmosphere and mood, helping you to think more deliberately about composition rather than simply recording what's in front of you. We begin by looking at our viewpoint and the format of a painting. And David reminds us to pause before we paint and think about where we're standing and how we're viewing the subject. A small change in viewpoint, the position where we're standing, or choosing a different format, such as square compared to landscape, can make a surprising difference to how a painting feels. And the examples on these pages show how simple decisions like this can help make your paintings more interesting and much stronger. Subjects that inspire artists are many, from landscapes and seascapes to portraits and still life. Here David introduces the idea of selective seeing, learning how to choose what really matters in a scene rather than trying to paint everything you can see. So instead of copying a subject exactly, he encourages you to simplify, edit and focus on the shapes, light or mood that caught your attention in the first place. So these examples illustrate how leaving things out can often make a painting stronger and more expressive. Once you've chosen your format, the next step is deciding where to place the elements so the painting feels balanced and engaging. David introduces simple ideas like the rule of thirds and asymmetrical balance, all aimed at helping the viewer's eye move naturally around the painting, whilst reminding you that these rules can also be broken. Every painting needs a focal point, somewhere for the viewer's eye to settle, and David explains how choosing a clear point of interest helps to give your painting purpose and shows simple ways to strengthen it so the viewer knows exactly where to look first. David now looks at how to create a path through your painting, simple ways of guiding the viewer's eye from one area to another. He explains how shapes, light, shadows and repeated elements can gently lead the eye through the picture, and that small adjustments, even moving things slightly, can make a big difference to how a painting reads. I really appreciate how David uses the paintings from a variety of artists to illustrate these points. It's really helpful. Perspective is a concept that can feel daunting at first, especially for beginners, but without a basic understanding, your paintings will lack a convincing sense of distance. We use perspective to create the illusion of a three-dimensional scene on a flat two-dimensional sheet of paper. Without getting over mathematical, David clearly explains linear and aerial perspective, eye level and vanishing points, using practical illustrations and providing simple tips for judging angles and proportions. Colour and tone aren't just about making a painting look good, they're also powerful tools in composition. David explains how choosing a limited palette, or using dominant colours, and controlling light and dark values can help guide the viewer's eye through a painting. The emphasis here is on using colour and tone in a considered, planned way to make your paintings feel more cohesive and intentional. As an artist, you can give a scene whatever mood you like, but to do this you need to be aware of the effect of different tonal values and colours, and when and where to use hard and soft edges. Mood and atmosphere is something that you can control, and a fun exercise to develop this skill is to paint the same scene at different times of years and day and in different weather conditions. I personally love to paint snow scenes, although when it actually snows, I rarely venture out in icy conditions. I'm far too afraid of falling over and injuring myself. And here we are at chapter 4. This is a fabulous chapter, packed with beautiful paintings that will inspire you, covering a wide range of subjects, including landscapes and seascapes, still life and figures and portraits, along with lessons to help you create texture and give a strong sense of three-dimensional form. Wow! Just look at this incredible landscape painting showcased on the right by artist Carol Evans. The warm low evening sun catching the rocks and the leaves of the bushes reflecting in the water. This is a stunning painting. Wherever you are in the world, opportunities for painting the landscape are never far away, are they? The land, sea and sky provide a never-ending source of inspiration. Skies and clouds are endlessly varied, from glowing sunsets, dark dramatic thunderclouds to dull misty days. In David's moorland sky exercise, he shares a few simple techniques, including light washes, wet in wet effects and lifting out, all helping to convey a real sense of space and atmosphere. Trees and foliage appear in many landscape scenes. Sometimes they sit quietly in the background, while at other times they are the main focus, or a study in colour, abstract shapes and pattern. And here we have a step-by-step project, courtesy of artist Naomi Tideman, who reminds us that the key to painting foliage is not getting too caught up in all the detail, especially trying to paint every single leaf. Naomi lists the materials she's used and provides clear photographs of each stage so you can easily follow along and have a go yourself. And here we have a study in green, kindly provided by the artist Richard Thorne. In many landscapes, green is the predominant colour, and it's amazing just how many different shades of green there are. And did you know that our eyes are particularly sensitive to green, which means we as humans can see more subtle variations in green than in most other colours. This exercise uses a range of pre-mixed greens to create a unified scene that's full of light and shade. I just love the finished painting. I feel as though I can hear the bees buzzing and that I could quite happily walk straight into the meadow. These gallery pages illustrate how close observation of light and how it falls across buildings, landscapes and foliage can add a convincing sense of realism to your work. And these gallery pages explore the many moods of water, from gentle reflections to moving streams. We have a lovely example from Carol Evans' top right, where wet-in-wet washes are used to suggest the calm surface of the water, reflecting the blue of the sky, with transparent layers used to give a real sense of clarity in the shallows. The sea is vast and full of colour and texture and movement. In this exercise, Richard Thorne will show you how to create a seascape and capture the sparkle on water. Nancy Meadows Taylor focuses on rippling reflections, where moving water breaks up and distorts what's reflected from above. She shows how simple horizontal strokes, soft edges and broken shapes can convincingly suggest movement without overworking the detail. Her final painting, Safe Anchor, is really striking, and the reflections in the water sort of form an abstract pattern. It's almost like an abstract painting in its own right. It's just beautiful. And here are some gallery examples of a different type of water, frozen water, and we've got a selection of snowscapes here, winter landscapes, which make very appealing subjects. Every surface has a texture of some sort. This might be smooth or rough, and a variety of watercolour techniques can be used to convey this. This gallery of paintings introduces you to what can be achieved. A still life painting doesn't have to be an arrangement of lots of different objects. A collection of similar items, for example shells, can make a really interesting study. Shells come in a fantastic range of colours, shapes, sizes and textures, making them an excellent project for practising a variety of watercolour techniques. The effects of time, weather and nature on both man-made and natural surfaces can make for fascinating subjects for a painting, from rusting metal on old chains, locks and hinges to flaking paint and cracked brickwork. Even the most mundane objects can become compelling studies. In this project, artist David Poxon shows you how to paint an old door and rusty padlock, while giving you the opportunity to practice using masking fluid as well. Fabrics come in many different textures, from sheer chiffon to smooth silks and satins, soft velvet and pattern lace. One of the true masters of painting fabric was John Singer Sargent, and I was fortunate enough to see an exhibition of his work in person last year. The paintings are life-size and they really do stop you in your tracks. When painting fabrics, you need to look for changes in tone that convey the folds. And with patterned or striped textiles, observe how changes in the direction of the pattern show how the fabric has been draped. Here is a small gallery of paintings focusing on shiny objects. I've spent quite a long time studying these. In the top left is Pasteurised by Denny Bond, and on the right the metallic gold in a painting by Jerry Thompson. How shiny is that? And yet there's no metallic paint involved at all. That illusion of shine is created entirely with watercolour. It's quite remarkable. Buildings offer endless opportunities for exploring texture in watercolour, from neglected structures with broken windows and missing roof tiles to beautifully preserved old buildings. Here is a small gallery of work by some amazing watercolourists, and I'm particularly drawn to Thierry Duval's painting of the Sennelier shop window. Take a moment to notice how the building opposite is reflected in the glass. It quite honestly took my breath away. So why not have a go yourself in this step-by-step tutorial provided by Donna Whitty. Animals are also wonderful subjects for studying texture, and a range of techniques can be used here, including wet in wet, dry brush and a more layered approach. And because watercolour is transparent, you can glaze one colour over another and capture subtle colour changes and value shifts, which makes watercolour a wonderful medium for painting flowers, as you can create the illusion of light shining through the translucent petals. White flowers are one of those subjects that look simple, right up until you try to paint them. In this step-by-step project by Karen Vernon, you'll learn how to suggest white by painting the delicate colours hiding in the shadows. And it's worth remembering that some of the best painters of white didn't paint white at all. Joaquin Sorolla, for example, was extraordinary at capturing bright light through subtle shifts in tone and temperature, and although he was an oil painter, the principles are fundamentally the same. It does make you wonder, doesn't it? So seeing this step by step, are you tempted to have a go at painting a white flower of your own? I'd love to know. Please let me know in the comments below. Portraits can be very sensitively painted in watercolour with delicate translucent washes. I really love the painting in the top right, called 92 by Denny Bond. I like how the circular pattern in the background picks up on the polka dots in the sitter's skirt and even the string of pearls around her neck. The clock introduces the quiet idea of time passing, and the lady's hair, well, that's my favourite part. It's so well observed, it just looks completely real. This gallery section looks at posing for portraits and how small shifts in a viewpoint can change the whole feel of a painting. A sitter looking directly at you creates one kind of connection, while a profile or turned head feels more reflective. Older faces are often more interesting to paint simply because they're full of character. This section guides you through a portrait step by step, beginning with a simple drawing and slowly building up layers of colour and tone. You might even like to try this using a drawing of one of your own loved ones. Including figures in a scene helps to bring a painting to life. Even small, loosely suggested people can give a sense of scale and movement and atmosphere. They don't need to dominate the scene, but they will make it feel inhabited and real. So we've now come to the final few pages of this incredibly detailed chapter, and the concluding project focuses on creating a colourful street cafe scene. What surprised me the most about this chapter is the sheer range of subjects watercolour can handle so beautifully. I hope it's given you a sense of the possibility and perhaps a little nudge to try something new, but without any pressure to always get it right. In the final chapter of this incredible book, Chapter 5, we're going to look at some very different approaches to watercolour through the work of 10 professional artists. I think you're going to love this chapter. Each profile includes a brief biography of the artist, and they share their favourite colours and techniques, and their palette, paints, papers and workspaces. I think I've probably waffled on quite enough by this point, and you may well be getting tired of hearing my voice. I know I certainly am. So I'm going to let these paintings speak for themselves, and I'll join you again at the end for a summary and a conclusion. We begin with an introduction to Mike Barr, who says, "Keep it simple and your paintings will impress." Well, we've now reached the end of this very comprehensive book. What I think really sets it apart is the way David Webb reinforces his teaching through the work of other artists, alongside sharing the benefit of his own experience. It's a generous and, I think, rather selfless approach, showing us how the same techniques and ideas can be interpreted in very different ways, which is arguably far more valuable than a single voice perspective. David Webb himself brings a huge amount of experience to this book. He was born in East London and has been painting in watercolour since his teens. After spending more than 20 years working as a natural history illustrator, he later returned to watercolour in a looser, more expressive style. I've been genuinely surprised by the range of subjects and styles covered in this book, from texture and architecture to portraits, figures, atmosphere, landscapes and seascapes, and more than once while filming this review I've found myself wanting to put the book down and pick up my brushes instead. And for me, that's always the best sign of a good book. This book feels less like a single course and much more like a library you can return to again and again. It's a book you can dip into depending on what you're working on, rather than something you read once and put away. And when you consider just how much is packed into it, the demonstrations, the paintings and the insights from multiple professional artists, it really is extraordinary that we can buy something this comprehensive for what amounts to peanuts. We're incredibly lucky to have access to books like this today. If you'd like to explore David's book further, you'll find links in the description below. I've included bookshop.org links, an international retailer which supports independent bookshops, as well as Amazon links. I've also included links to David Webb's own website, his YouTube channel, Facebook and Instagram pages, so if you'd like to see more of his work or follow what he's currently teaching through courses and workshops throughout the UK. Thank you so much for watching. I really hope you've enjoyed this review of the Complete Guide to Watercolour by David Webb. I hope you found my review helpful, and if you did, please give it a like. It really does help YouTube share the video with other people who may be interested in David's book. And if you'd like to watch more reviews of fantastic art books, you'll find plenty more for you here on the channel. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. It genuinely makes my day, and I do read and reply to everyone. So until next time, happy painting.